Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description.
Hello everybody. Today on the channel, I'm going to be talking a little bit more petrol head philosophy. In short, I'm going to be responding to one of the most common comments I get whenever I do a video updating you on one of my Ferraris. And this video comes with a little bit of a warning, because though it likely contains information that to some people I think is obvious, to others it may be less so, and some may even consider it borderline offensive. You have been warned. So then, here I am once again standing in a pub car park, though not a muddy one. That got a lot of people very upset last time I did a 550 video. And I've got beside me my Ferrari 430 Scuderia, and over here my good buddy Ben's Ford Focus ST, which coincidentally is going up for sale. And if you'd like to bag yourself a very nice example of a very usable modern classic, please drop me a line if it hasn't already yet gone. Oh, and in case you recognise the car and the name, yes, this is Ben the Sparkles. He's traded it for a diesel Mondeo because he's starting a business. He is now an automotive valeter, and he's been looking after this, though don't judge it too harshly because he cleaned it a couple of weeks ago and I've driven it a lot and it got rained on and then I parked it next to a field. So, yeah, but he does do good work, I promise, and I'll put his details up on the screen if you would like your car cleaned and you're in the central Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire, Bucks, Northamptonshire, bit of England. Yeah, anyway, why am I making this video? That is for a very simple reason. Every single time I do a piece talking about the costs of running a Ferrari, I get one comment more than any other. And though there are some variations, it goes along the lines of, why on earth do you bother? This clearly is proof that these are terrible cars. Why don't you buy, insert any other brand here? Ford, Porsche, Mercedes, whatever you like. Why is it that you bother with these silly Italian things? Well, I'll give you the short answer now. I like them and I can afford them. And if you would like the summary of this video, that's it. I believe that anybody who wants a car should be able to buy it, and provided they can run it without some necessities being overlooked. What's wrong in that? If you want something like this or this and you can have it without the wife or kids going hungry, what's the problem? Now I'm lucky. I don't have kids to feed. I've got Ferraris to feed instead. And something else I would like to point out, which I have mentioned in a few other videos before, but is always worth reiterating. Being British and having nice things is a bit odd, because the British have a kinda weird relationship with nice things. So do the Americans, but it's in very much a different way. And I wish sometimes we could find a nice sort of halfway house between those two approaches. You see, the British get all very funny and weird if you have nice things. Never really quite sure what it is. I don't think it's really jealousy or anything like that. Maybe it is. Who knows? But you'll always get people saying, why is it you're talking about your Ferraris so often? You're always trying to remind us that you own these things. Well, look, you've clicked, or may have in the past, clicked on a video talking about one of my cars. And if I were to do a video that says, here's what I've just spent on my Ferrari, without talking about my Ferrari or how much I've just spent on it, I wouldn't really be doing a very good job, would I? Now, I'm not exactly going to go and give you a copy of my YouTube earnings, which apparently is a very trendy thing to do now, but I also think it is important to be honest, direct, and transparent about the amounts it is that I spend on my cars. And that's really just a point of curiosity, a point of information. I am in this very lucky and fortunate position whereby talking about the cars also provides the revenue to look after the cars. If I were earning the same amount of money that I am now doing anything else, I don't think I could justify the cars that I have. At least not to the extent that I have them. Maybe I could have one of these, but not 3. And if any random person in the street were to bump into me and ask what it is that I drive, I'm more as likely going to tell them a Citroen BX or Toyota Celica than anything fancy like this. That's because if someone asks what you drive and you say, I've got 3 Ferraris, I'd think you're a dickhead as well. But let's get that out of the way, shall we? The main point I want to make today is that, yes, Ferraris can be expensive to run. Guess what? So can just about everything else. Ferraris at least have the good graces to be expensive cars when they were new, and frequently 10, 15 or 50 years later are still relatively expensive cars, which means that though they are certainly capable of throwing you large bills, they at least have a fairly high value, meaning that said large bill might be a relatively small proportion of the overall price. Am I going to tell you that running one of these is going to cost the same as running one of these? No, I'm not, because that is just not true. However, is it also possible for one of these to generate you bills running into the thousands of pounds? Yes, of course it is, especially if you start down the route of modifications, which is a very common thing when it comes to cars like this. There are plenty of old Fords out there which 25 years ago you couldn't give away. Capris, Escorts, Sierras, stuff like that. And today, these trade for unthinkable sums in the classic car world. And just about every single £100,000 old Ford Escort that you see, I guarantee has had some serious money spent on it. And guess what? When a car is a complete rust bucket, is so holy it wouldn't even make a good sieve, well, it's going to cost a lot of money to restore. And very often, this is specialist work, and the fact is, the people working on it typically don't really care if it's a Ford or if it's a Ferrari. 100 hours labour is 100 hours labour. And frankly, if a full resto involves just 100 hours labour, well, I don't think that's really a full restoration, and you should consider yourself a very lucky person. I'm in the process of rebuilding an MG ZR, a car that I paid £2,000 for. And when I'm done, might be worth upwards of £5,000. And to get it there is going to cost me about £15,000. Yes, I know, this may make me eligible for my local lunatic asylum, but I'm doing it because I don't think anybody else is going to, and I personally believe that it is a car worth saving. Today also, getting the parts for them is still relatively easy. You can't say that for a lot of other old stuff. And the fact too is that when it comes to a lot of stuff, say your Fords, which once upon a time were nice and common, because they got relatively cheap and because people still thought there were loads out there, nobody really ever bothered looking after them. That is why, in 50 years' time, maybe, these two cars will be worth exactly the same. Because although at one point there were a lot more of these than there were these always got looked after. Many of these did not. And if someone gave you one of these and said, yeah, cool, here's a nice Focus ST, by the way, it's going to cost 20 grand to make it a good one because it's full of rust underneath, well, you're not going to do it, are you? It's examples like this, which have been well looked after, which hopefully are going to hold their value in everything else. But there is no car out there that is going to be maintenance free. And as they get increasingly elderly, that becomes ever more apparent. Even things you might have thought as completely unburstable still need a lot of work. You may have seen on the channel that we recently gifted a Mercedes W124 to our good friend Will. Well, the previous owner of that acquired it some 20 years ago, and they paid £9,000 for it. At that point in time, it was a much more youthful car than it is today. Even so, in the first year of ownership, they spent more than the value of the car on maintenance work. And that's a Mercedes W124. That is one of the most legendarily well-built cars of all time. So a hand-built 25, 30 or 40-year-old Italian supercar occasionally needing some maintenance, that really shouldn't come as a surprise. And I mentioned earlier, I like talking numbers, don't I? Yeah, sure, some of the Ferraris have been expensive. I wager the 550 has likely cost me about £30,000 in maintenance in the time that I've had it. And that's nowhere near as many miles as I would have liked to have covered. Probably thinking about it, it's cost me something like about £3 a mile just in keeping it going. But the best way to solve that equation is to drive it more, which I intend to do this year after it's come back from service. And I did want to do this video stood next to the 550, but something did go wrong between the last video and this one, which is rather embarrassing, but I'll talk about that stood next to the 550. This has been very, very well behaved, actually. It does need a service and an MOT fairly soon. Last year, I took it to Andorra. It didn't miss a beat. Did country lane stuff brilliantly, motorway stuff brilliantly, went on the Autobahn. Fantastic. Loved it. It's now got some Lamborghini bronze alloys on it, courtesy of James over at Wheelhouse Alloys down in Ipswich. And I think it looks sensational. Wish I'd done it a little bit earlier. But that really has been good as gold. The F12 has cost me a bit more, I think, than I would have liked. I think about £10,000 to £15,000 I've spent on that car over about 3 years, but then it's a 730 horsepower, £250,000 car. It at least hasn't depreciated anywhere near as much as a lot of other cars have, certainly not stuff costing that amount of money. I know people that spent £60,000 on an EV 3 years ago, and they've lost far more than I have on any of the Ferraris. But my Toyota Celica, paid £8,000 for that. Currently, it owes me more than 30. My Honda S2000, I paid £8,000 and a bit for that. At last check, I think that now owes me somewhere between £40,000 and £50,000. My Citroen BX GTI 16 valve, I was told that was a fairly good one. Bought it for £3,000. Currently, I'm about £10,000 into it, and we haven't even started on the cosmetic stuff. Cars are an expensive hobby. Though the people I know that are into horses will tell me that cars, in fact, are not an expensive hobby at all. Because ultimately, this, for me, is a toy. I'm in that luxurious position where I can call it that, and ultimately, this was never intended to be anyone's daily driver, was it? Although, it is actually mine. My other half has a Porsche Boxster. We paid £4,000 for that, and it had a really good history with it. I think to date we've spent about £12,000 to £15,000 on that. My friend Chris recently picked up a Boxster from a specialist, paid £12,000 for that, and within the first 3 months that needed about £3,000 to £4,000 spent on it. Money today, sadly, doesn't go anywhere near as far as it used to. And the simple fact of the matter is, if you want to get into a car cheaply, you're probably going to want to get into a fairly boring one. Go and buy a 1.6 litre Toyota Corolla. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely, completely fine. They're great cars, and everybody should have a 1.6 litre Toyota Corolla or some sort of equivalent to it in their life. Because on the day that one of these maybe lets you down, that's the thing that you can go and get into. The simple fact is, though, I like talking about the cars. I like being honest with all of you about the reality, because for a long time, to me, this was just a dream. I am now lucky enough to be in the position where it isn't, and for those who are thinking of doing the same thing themselves, turning it from dream into reality, I think it is important that I am transparent and honest and tell you exactly what it is that you may be up against. Just recently, I spent a lot of time with the original Audi R8, the same one that was on Top Gear. Well, those you can now pick up for £25,000. But I frequently hear stories from specialists telling me that maybe you could easily spend £15,000 to £25,000 on top of your purchase price for a car that maybe doesn't have all that much wrong with it. But a couple of issues here, a problem there, and a small annoyance down here can quickly turn into a fairly serious bill. And if you're prepared for that, if you're ready for it, then that's absolutely fine. It's only if you weren't expecting it and you're not ready for it that it then turns into a problem. Now, this to me has always been fairly obvious. Nice cars cost money. But to some apparently, this is still a bit of a surprise. However, there is one thing I would like to say about all of this. Yeah, sure, keeping these things going, be it a Ford or a Ferrari, does cost something. And to get that money, for most people, involves having done some sort of work. Whether you feel that work is valid, worthy, or anything else, that is a totally separate discussion. But with cars now becoming a passion that by some is increasingly demonized, I think it is more important that we place the focus simply on enjoying the fact that there are those out there willing to spend their money on what ultimately is something a little bit silly, but that is still enjoyable. because by keeping these cars going, by keeping these cars running, we'll keep them out there for everybody to enjoy. And enjoying a car doesn't mean owning it. Just seeing it sometimes is enough. And that, I think, is always going to be worth celebrating. So, pointless rant? Who knows? If you've enjoyed it, or otherwise, let me know in the comment section down below. And don't forget, hit the like button, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.